I am on my way.
Looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Nice to have you all here. Obviously, especially if you're watching online, different face up here this morning. Pastor and Linda are on their way back from General Council. So, sounds like they've had a wonderful time. I know although they have been away, we have still been on their hearts and minds, and they have been praying for us, just like I know many of us have kept them on our hearts and minds and praying for them. Pastor actually asked me a few months ago if I wanted to speak this morning. A lot of things have happened from now and then. Pastor's been taking us through, obviously, the Bible this past year. And, I asked him, a couple weeks ago, I'm like, Pastor, I noticed you went from Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. We missed a book and then jumped into Isaiah. And in case you're wondering, that book we missed is the Song of Solomon. I said, Pastor, is there a reason you did that? He's like, no. He's, just the way my Bible reading's going. And he's like, if you want to preach about that, have at it. Go ahead. And I'll pass on that, Pastor, but thanks anyway. So, on a serious note, as Shirley was saying, sorry. I know we can all, as a community, agree that, we've been through a lot. I know a lot of individual people have been through a lot. And as Christians, being in the church, sometimes you feel like I'm walking with God, so I shouldn't hurt. I'm walking with God, so I really shouldn't have questions. I'm walking with God, so I should always be joyful. And there's times it's difficult to do. We have different things that come up, expected or not. Different things that happen that cause a lot of hurt, pain. And a lot of times when we have those hurts and pains, it leaves us into questions. Why, God? Why? And it's something, we all struggle with at different times. We don't always have the answers. Sometimes there are, questions in the church. God, why is this church splitting? Why is this feud? What's going on? These are supposed to be your people. What's happening? We turn on the news, and it's easy to ask God, why, God? Why? And so many of us have experienced so much hurt and pain in these last few years, in particularly. I know, it's myself, Michelle and I have asked why, and sometimes when we ask why, people take the impression that we're doubting God, that we don't trust God. Maybe we're mad at God. But that's not always the case when we ask God why. And sometimes asking the why helps. Sometimes we get an answer. Sometimes asking the why doesn't help. And sometimes we don't get the answer. I know my my family, Michelle, and I know we've lost our loved ones lately. A lot of us have. Michelle, a year and a half ago, was going back and forth to Omaha. Her grandpa, who was in his 90s, lived a long life, wasn't doing very good. And I know for Michelle, helping her mom take care of him at his apartment was difficult. You have this pillar in the family that's walked a godly life and has tried to raise all the kids and grandkids in a godly life, but yet taking care of them and seeing all the pain that he's in, it was left asking, why? If this servant who loved you so much, why is he going through this? Why can't you just take him away, Lord? Save him the pain, the agony. We have those moments. Our whys can be simple ones, almost childlike. Anybody that has kids has experienced that. Why does this happen, Dad? Why, does this happen, Mom? And there's some easy ones to answer. But then there's others that, to be honest, sometimes how do you answer? Sometimes you can't. And our whys, our hurt, our pain can grow in magnitude with what the situation that's going on, and frankly can even affect how people see God. Recently I had some family members up, obviously, and there's just different situations that people go through. And when we try to witness to people and share God's love, and the response is, I grew up this way. Kids shouldn't have to grow up in the way I did. And they're right. And for them it leaves them a sense of, where is God? If I went through this, then how can a God who loves me let me go through this? How can a God who loves me allow my loved ones to go through this? And I want to say, I think it's important that we're allowed to ask God the whys. In Psalms chapter 10, and if there's somebody in the Bible that was going to ask God why, we can definitely see why David would. Somebody that was going to become king, but then went through all the struggle with Saul. Someone who was king, and then his own son is rising up against him. In Psalms chapter 10, O Lord, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide when I am in trouble? And we can go on, a couple more in Psalms 13, verses 1 and 2. O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? And I don't know about you all, I'm sure everybody here has felt that way, or at least pretty close to it at one time or another. In Psalms 22, which has a strong prophecy of Jesus, and Jesus even echoes these words while he's on the cross. My God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. And those are honest questions that they were asking in the Bible. I have this pain, this grief, these situations going on. I don't know what to do with. I don't know how to handle them. As we go through those, I'm reminded as Christians, it's important to be careful how we do approach those situations, those people in pain and hurt. As Pastor was going over the book of Job a little while ago, we saw that. Job's wife, his friends came to him and, hey, buddy, you're doing this wrong, you did this wrong, you're sinning somewhere. And it's easy for us as Christians at times to take that theological approach, which, to be honest, there's truth to it. But sometimes that truth doesn't necessarily always help us weed through the pain and the hurt. It's a common one to explain the pain and hurt is simply because of sin. Romans 5:12, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. And that's one, it's true. And we find ourselves in certain situations, it may not heal us or have the healing effect we're looking at. I remember January 2007, living in Omaha. One of my sisters, Sherry, and her daughter was living with us at the time, and I believe one of my nephews was over. It was Sunday morning. Not everybody was awake yet, and heard a knock on the door. And some gentleman standing there, he's like, well, hey, we're just going around, we're canvassing the neighborhood. We just want to know if you heard anything last night. No, we didn't. They're like, okay, well, if you turn on the news, you're going to see why we're asking. And of course, turned on the news, and a grandfather, his daughter, and her boyfriend or husband was living there along with a couple of kids. And the worst thing that you can think of happened. And you're left with, that example of what sin can do in our world. Isaiah chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, for Jerusalem will stumble and Judah will fall, because they speak out against the Lord and refuse to obey him. They provoke him to his face. The very look on their faces gives them away. They display their sin like the people of Sodom and don't even want to try to hide it. They are doomed. They have brought destruction upon themselves. And I said, from Isaiah, a large part of Isaiah is written around that condition of Israel and Judah, their continual sin and disregard for God, and knowing that when those things happen, God is going to bring punishment. But whenever God brings punishment, he also wants there to be a healing, a regaining of what he had intended. And last week, as Pastor was talking about pressing on, when we come across these situations in our lives, we stand firm, we press on. And some of these things happen just simply because of Satan. Ephesians 6:12, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Again, a lot of the situations that we find ourselves in is simply because Satan wants to mess with as many people as he can. As Pastor mentioned last week, we know the end of the book. We know who is victorious. We know what happens at the end. And also, spiritual growth is another reason we find ourselves in some of these situations at times. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4. We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help. They help us develop endurance, and endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And those words are so true. And God can take those situations that we find ourselves in and turn them for His good. And at times, when we find ourselves in those situations, sometimes those ideas, those things that we read about in the Bible provide comfort, and sometimes they don't. Working through our trials and our tribulations, what we experience in this world is a process. And when we allow God to meet us in that pain and that hurt we're in, is when so many good things can come about, that healing. We saw that just a few weeks ago for those that was in service. For myself, it was such a privilege to see up front here. And I don't need to know all the details, but to know that up here, somebody was having an encounter with God. Doesn't mean they're struggling or doubting God. It doesn't mean their faith in God has wavered or going away. But there's that wrestle of, God, how do I take these situations in life and marry them with who you are and what you're doing? And to see in that play out up front here was just a special moment. I think in asking why, we do have to be careful. Again, we see in Job, if we're asking God, but we're attempting to supplant God's sovereignty, His ways, and thinking our ways are better, is when we're left in that pain and that hurt. It's like many things, it's what is your motive in asking God those why questions? Michelle and I, a few years ago, went to a marriage week-long counseling session in Branson, Missouri. One of the things that we talked about there is understanding each other's, lack of a better word, trigger points. If Michelle and I get into an argument, is Michelle really upset at me? There might be a situation that might be true, but there's plenty of situations that emotion presents itself is because she's looking for clarity that I still love her, that I still want the best for her. And I think when we ask God why with the right motives, it's that same thing. It's not, God, I doubt you. God, I'm mad at you. God, you don't know what you're doing. But it's a, God, I'm trusting in you, but I need help. God, I don't understand. I don't need to. I would like to, but it's okay if I don't, because I'm still going to trust in you. And with that, sometimes those questions can deepen our relationship with God. Like I said, we saw that a few weeks ago right up here. And those Psalms verses I read a little bit ago, to follow up in Psalms chapter 10, he asked the questions before and he follows up. The Lord is king forever and ever. The godless nations will vanish from the land. Lord, you know the hopes of the helpless. Surely you will hear their cries and comfort them. You will bring justice to the orphans and the oppressed, so mere people can no longer terrify them. In Psalms 13, 5 and 6, we see this shift again. God, why? Where are you at? What is going on? But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good. And in Psalm 22, following up, my God, why have you forsaken me? But I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you among your assembled people. Praise the Lord, all you who fear him. Honor him, all you descendants of Jacob. Show him reverence, all you descendants of Israel, for he has not ignored or belittled the suffering of the needy. He has not turned his back on them, but he listens to their cries for help. So it's as we ask those whys, we let that strengthen our relationship with God. In those moments, many times it's those raw nerves that God sees that we let God see. God knows they're there. But then he works with us through those situations. Over the past couple of months, in particular, I was telling Michelle this about a month ago. Our Christian walk is a lot of times that process of where is God taking us from this point to this point. It's not always a bed of roses at the beginning of it. It's not necessarily easy at the beginning of it. It can be difficult. It can be painful. But I was just talking to God and praying to him, trying myself to work through these situations. It's funny because I always give Michelle a hard time. I love the way she prays and talks to God. She has these moments to where, she's pretty much certain she hears God in an audible way, which I think is the coolest thing. I'm a little jealous of that at times, so, but, I understand that's her and God's relationship. He might not speak to me the same way, but I was trying to get through this and wrestle through this. I know God was always also telling me that when you go through these situations, they cause pain. They cause hurt. But as you walk through them, it does not change who God is. Hebrews 13, verse 8 says, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I think that's one even a lot of non-Christians know, right? And I think one of the difficulties I have, is, sometimes when we ask God why, we work through the pain. We want to also put God into a little box. If God's going to answer something, he's going to do it the way I think he should. If God is going to answer somebody being healed, but in that healing, it's the ultimate healing that they're in heaven, I might think otherwise, but God's ways are not my ways. But when we put God in that box, then we have the danger of missing or seeing what God is doing, what he's trying to do. Just because Jesus is the same doesn't mean he's always going to show up in situations the same way for everyone in the same situations. Isaiah 43, verses 19 and 20. It says, "For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. The wild animals in the fields will thank me, the jackals and owls too, for giving them water in the desert. Yes, I will make rivers in the dry wasteland so my chosen people can be refreshed." When we go through those situations, God doesn't just leave us. He's already planning ways that we don't see that we don't know about to get us through those experiences in life, those situations in life. And a lot of times we don't know where God has taken us or how he's actually taken us. But if we don't let God do his new thing in us, we can potentially miss out in a huge blessing and huge growth. You look through the Bible, there's many examples of God showing up and doing something that just blows everybody's minds. You know, as the Israelites left Egypt, going to the promised land, who would have thought God would show up and provide food from heaven for them every single morning? Who would have thought that just by Moses obeying God and hitting a rock, that was going to bring forth life-giving water? Who would have thought, as God was growing in relationship, I should say his people were growing in relationship with him, when they came across Jericho, who would have thought God would use a prostitute to help the people overtake Jericho? Not only overtake it, but would use that same person who God looked at in a different way to be part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. Elijah in his exile, expecting to hear God in this massive windstorm, didn't hear him. Expecting to hear God through this massive earthquake, didn't hear him. Through the fire, didn't hear him. But hearing God in a still small voice. Who would have thought for there to be reconciliation between us and God, that God would send down Jesus from heaven, the one being that did not deserve to leave heaven, but still did? Who would have thought God would do something like that? And in doing something like that, on his death, his crucifixion, having the temple veil ripped from the bottom to the top to allow us access with God, in a relationship with God that God intended for us to have. And who would have thought that through that salvation of the Jewish people, God was now going to extend that same salvation to every single one of us? See, God, as I work through this, a large part of that is showing me that through our struggles, God never leaves us alone. It may feel like it at times. I mean, we read it through Psalms. Say you can go through the Bible and find many other spots. Why, God? Why? I feel alone. I feel deserted. I don't see you. I don't hear you. But the truth is, God does not leave us by ourselves. Isaiah 43, chapter 43, verses 1 and 2, and then into verse 5. But now, O Jacob, listen to the Lord who created you, O Israel. The one who formed you says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you go through the deep waters. See, a lot of times we don't think we're going to experience anything bad. Pastor talked about that last week. We are. Things are going to come along our ways. But when we go through those deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through the rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. You know, it's those words, I am with you. that for me give me strength. That I might not have the answers. I may never have them, and that's okay. When I get to heaven, at that point, as meaningful as having those answers are and how from the depths of my soul they came while I walk the earth might be, by the time I get to heaven into his presence, I'm not sure how much those questions are really going to matter at that point. Isaiah 41, verses 10, 13, and 17 go on to say, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. For I hold you by your right hand. I, the Lord your God, I say to you, don't be afraid. I am here to help you. When the poor and the needy search for water and there is none, and their tongue are parched from thirst, then I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will never abandon them." And just as he did not abandon his people, which there's times they struggled to see that, but he didn't leave them. He always had a plan of redemption for them, of giving them strength, of giving them a future, of giving them hope. You know, even Jesus, after he rose again, as he was given the disciples the Great Commission in Matthew, it says, "And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And I wonder in my mind for these disciples, the followers of Jesus, for what they had experienced over those three and a half years of being with Jesus. You know, a little bit before that, they just saw Jesus crucified. They saw Jesus dead. But upon his resurrection, spending time with him, how much did their vision, their belief in God, how much did it change to where I've seen Jesus firsthand be with me? I've seen Jesus firsthand do things I did not expect. I firsthand felt at times I was in a pit of despair. Didn't know what was going on. But Jesus was still with me. And if Jesus says he's going to be with me till the end of the age, I can rest fully knowing that God is with me. And in the book of Psalms, we see a lot of distress and loneliness and questioning who God is. But with that, we also see in those times who God is to us. And if we can, just real quick, for example, as the psalmist was going through, one of the things he would always point to was God being a shield in his time of distress. We'll just take a couple moments. If something comes to your mind that God presented himself to his people in the book of Psalms, go and shout it out. The book of Psalms, we see God is our shield. He's our rock. He is our fortress. He is our protector, our refuge. We're going through life, and life is trying to mess us up. God's our hiding place. He's our safety. He's our healer. He's our rock. He's our salvation. And all those things looking through there points back to that common theme. If God is all those things in all those situations, he's present with us in all those situations. He can't be our shield if he's not there. He can't be our rock for us to stand on if he's nowhere around. He can't heal us if he doesn't care about us. He can't be our hiding place if we can't go hide in him. You know, all those things testify that whatever situation we might find ourselves in, good or bad, however we might be feeling going through that struggle, does not change who God is. A God who's always with us. At the beginning, it showed that picture of the boy. I know it was kind of tough to see on here. Small boy holding that light, out in the distance, spooky-looking castle, building, bats flying around. And I know that's how I feel at times. When life's hitting me hard, I look around and you see scary things. What's going on, God? Why? But like that little boy's holding that light in that picture, Jesus is the light of this world. If he's always with me forever and ever, I can hold on to him. I can begin to see things that God might want to reveal to me that I didn't see before. When I thought everything around me was scary, it doesn't have to be scary. When that light of Jesus shines on it, you can start seeing things of beauty. As Willard's playing this song, obviously that song is talking about, in part, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were going to hold on to God and his ways, and they were not going to let the world determine how they handled their walk with God. As they were thrown into the fiery furnace, said, you know what? You can do that, King. God's going to be with us. If we die, we're still with God. But what did God do? He showed up on that scene and walked in that furnace with them. And he does the same thing for us today, is in those situations that we find ourselves in. He's walking with us. He's protecting us. He's guiding us. We might not always understand it all the time, but our God is still there. Lord, I want to thank you for this time. To share with others, God. You know our hearts. You know our lives. You know our thoughts. Lord, you know what brings us pain. Lord, we know how we can struggle with that. But Lord, in the midst of that, in the midst of walking around our own furnaces, God, in our own pit of despair, in our own wilderness, Lord, I pray that in your time, God, take us through that process of knowing you're there with us. Lord, through that process of it might hurt today, but tomorrow's a new day for you. Help us to hold on to your promises of who you are, Lord, and that you do not, nor will you, leave us alone. Lord, as we go out from this church, we just pray that your hand would be with us, Lord. You know everything that everybody individually is going through, what our extended families are going through, our neighbors, our friends, Lord, that you would still show up in those situations and show these people that we know ourselves a refreshing sense that, God, you're there with us. And we just thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.